In Katy, Texas, a shotgun blast shattered more than just a window. It destroyed the facade of a perfect suburban life. In the quiet town of Katy, Texas, the Temple family seemed to embody perfection. David Temple, a former high school football star, was adored by the community for his athletic achievements and outgoing personality. His wife, Belinda, was a beloved teacher, dedicated to her students and the town she called home. Together, they had a beautiful marriage, a young son named Evan, and another child on the way. To the outside world, they were the picture of success, love, and ambition. But on January 11th, 1999, that image of perfection shattered. What began as an ordinary day quickly turned into one that would forever change the Temple family. That evening, Belinda's body was discovered in their home, violently taken from those who loved her. The town of Katy, once filled with admiration for the family, now found itself gripped by disbelief and horror. How could such a senseless crime happen to someone so cherished? As investigators delved into the details of Belinda's murder, a disturbing truth emerged. The perfect life that David and Belinda had carefully built wasn't as flawless as it seemed. Beneath the smiles and the community's admiration, there were secrets that David had worked hard to hide. The seemingly devoted husband and father was now at the center of suspicion, and the town's perception of him began to change. The timeline of that fateful day became a puzzle for authorities to piece together. As new revelations surfaced, questions surrounding David's behavior, his marriage to Belinda, and his actions that night grew. What had really happened in their home? Could the answers ever bring peace to Belinda's grieving family? The Temple family's story, once filled with dreams and promise, now stood as a symbol of loss, betrayal, and the unraveling of a perfect life. The mystery of Belinda's death would haunt Katy for years, casting a shadow that time could never fully erase. Would the truth ever be uncovered? Or would the tragic fate of Belinda Temple remain an unsolved heartbreak? David Temple's early years were marked by promise and triumph, suggesting a future filled with endless potential. Raised in Katy, Texas, he was a natural athlete. As captain of the Katy High School football team in 1986, David led his team to an undefeated season, cementing his status as a local legend. His success was unquestionable, and it seemed he was destined for greatness. After high school, David's athletic talent earned him a scholarship to Stephen F. Austin State University, where he continued to shine. His reputation followed him to Nacogdoches, where the small college town treated him like royalty. David's charm, however, wasn't just rooted in his athletic ability. His easy smile and magnetic personality drew people to him, making him the center of attention wherever he went. It was at Stephen F. Austin that David met Belinda Johnson, a driven and intelligent young woman. Though not an athlete, Belinda was a passionate student with a deep love for teaching. The two were drawn together by their shared ambition and respect for one another. Despite their different paths, David's athletic success and Belinda's academic focus, their relationship blossomed quickly. David's affection for Belinda was clear in the grand gestures he made to show his love. One of the most memorable moments came when he proposed to her on the football field in front of friends and teammates. It was a public display of a love that seemed as passionate as it was genuine. In 1992, David and Belinda married, beginning a new chapter that seemed like the start of a fairy tale. They returned to Katy, where they quickly established themselves as pillars of the community. David taught and coached at Alif Hastings High School, while Belinda took a teaching position at Katy High School. The couple's professional success, along with their picture-perfect image, made them admired by their peers. However, over time, the cracks in their marriage began to form. What had once appeared to be a perfect relationship slowly transformed into something unrecognizable. The life they had built together began to unravel, and the fairy tale that had once seemed destined for greatness turned into a tragedy, one that would forever change the course of their lives and shock the community that once admired them. From the outside, David and Belinda Temple seemed to have it all, the perfect couple everyone admired. In their small town of Katy, Texas, they epitomized suburban success. Both were highly respected in their careers. Belinda, a beloved teacher at Katy High School, known for her genuine connection with students, and David, a former local football hero, turned passionate coach at Alif Hastings High School. Together, they were the gold standard, admired by their peers and loved by the community. In 1995, they welcomed their son, Evan, and their little family seemed complete. Their love for each other and for their son was obvious, with their home filled with the joy of parenthood. Yet as the years passed, the pressures of their careers began to strain their marriage. David, once the life of every gathering, became consumed with work. Belinda, juggling motherhood and her demanding job, found herself increasingly isolated. Though they continued to present a perfect image, behind closed doors, things were beginning to change. In 1998, they announced they were expecting their second child, a daughter. The news was met with excitement, and once again they seemed like the ideal couple. They prepared eagerly for their daughter's arrival, while making sure Evan would adjust to the change. But the reality of their lives was beginning to diverge from the perfect image they projected. As the months went on, subtle shifts in their relationship became more noticeable. David's behavior grew erratic, and rumors of tension began to surface. Whispers circulated that he had become controlling and verbally abusive. Family members who had long admired their marriage began to voice concern. Belinda, once outgoing and vibrant, had become quieter and more withdrawn. Those closest to her noticed the stress she was under, but had no idea how deeply the cracks in her marriage had grown. Despite the warmth Belinda projected to the outside world, behind closed doors, the situation was much darker. Her friends and family could see she was struggling, but they didn't fully understand the extent of the emotional turmoil she was facing. Though the Temple family continued to present an image of perfection, the tension and unease grew. It was only a matter of time before the facade would collapse entirely, revealing the truth of what lay beneath the surface. As 1998 came to a close, the once solid foundation of David and Belinda Temple's marriage began to crumble. What had once seemed like a perfect fairy tale union was now falling apart in ways neither of them could have predicted. David, once the dependable man Belinda had married, began to show signs of change, small, subtle shifts that grew impossible to ignore. It started with little things. After attending a high school reunion by himself, David returned home, distant. His mood had changed, his temper sharper, his words more cutting. Belinda, who had always relied on David's openness, noticed he wasn't eager to share his day with her anymore. Instead, he withdrew into himself, creating an emotional distance that neither of them could bridge. The tension between them grew, and though they went through the motions of family life, it felt as if an invisible wall had sprung up between them. David's behavior grew even more erratic over time. He spent increasing amounts of time away from home, citing work and personal projects as reasons. But Belinda couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Pregnant with their second child, she had hoped the excitement of expanding their family would bring them closer. Instead, she felt more isolated and abandoned. Her attempts to connect with David were met with cold indifference or outright hostility. Belinda's world, once full of love and promise, now felt suffocating. Though friends and family expressed concern, they couldn't fully understand the emotional turmoil she was facing. She tried to rationalize David's behavior, telling herself that stress and the pressures of life had caused him to act out. But deep down, she knew something was terribly wrong. The subtle signs of controlling behavior that once seemed small were now glaring. David began to control their finances, limiting Belinda's access to money and making decisions without consulting her. It seemed as though he was more interested in maintaining control than in the well-being of their family. The most painful blow came when Belinda suspected David was hiding something darker, a possible affair. At first, Belinda dismissed the rumors. How could her husband betray her in such a way? But the signs were undeniable. David's increasing secrecy, late nights, and constant phone buzzing. When she confronted him, he denied everything, but his answers felt empty, and the lies only fueled her suspicions. The birth of their daughter, which should have been a joyful occasion, only highlighted the growing divide between them. Belinda, exhausted from the pregnancy and struggling to hold the fractured family together, fought to keep the love they once shared. But by then, David was already lost in an affair with Heather Scott, something that would soon become a central element in the investigation that would shatter their lives. The cracks in the Temple family's perfect facade were widening, and the events of January 11th, 1999, were fast approaching. January 11th, 1999, began like any other day in the Temple household in Katy, Texas. The sun rose over the sleepy streets, casting a soft, golden glow across the neighborhood. Inside their home, Belinda Temple, a dedicated teacher at Katy High School, woke up early to start her day. Her 3-year-old son, Evan, wasn't feeling well, so she decided to keep him home from daycare and stayed by his side while preparing for the day ahead. David Temple, her husband, a coach and teacher at Ali F. Hastings High School, had his own routine. He left for work early, as usual, but this day felt strangely mundane. There was a subtle undercurrent of tension between them, though neither could pinpoint the reason. David returned home earlier than expected, which wasn't unusual, but he seemed distant, colder than usual. Belinda couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. As the morning went on, Belinda kissed Evan goodbye and left for school, leaving him in the care of a neighbor. Little did she know this would be the last time she would see her son. Later that afternoon, around 4 p.m., David took Evan to a nearby store, Brookshire Brothers. Everything seemed calm, but there was an underlying tension between them. David's actions appeared ordinary, just a father running an errand with his son. But by 4:30 p.m., things would take a horrific turn. David was caught on security camera footage at Home Depot, purchasing supplies. His demeanor seemed unnervingly composed, a stark contrast to the chaos that would follow. Around 5:30 p.m., David returned home, but the tranquility of the Temple household was shattered. He found shards of broken glass scattered across the floor, which he initially dismissed as a result of a burglary. His immediate explanation to 911 was that someone had broken into the house. But when police arrived, they found no signs of forced entry, no indication of a break-in. Inside, the scene was far more sinister. Belinda's body was discovered in a bedroom, her life brutally taken. The evidence was clear. She had been murdered. But the real question remained: who was responsible for this senseless violence? Was it the work of a stranger, or was it someone closer to Belinda, someone she trusted? David's 911 call, in which he claimed his wife was lying in a pool of blood, revealed the extent of his distress. But the investigators quickly realized that David's story didn't align with the evidence. The lack of forced entry and the strange details in his account raised suspicions. This was no random burglary gone wrong. Something far darker had occurred. As the investigation unfolded, a chilling reality began to emerge. The circumstances surrounding Belinda's death set off a chain of events that would eventually expose hidden truths about David's life and marriage. The Temple family's seemingly perfect suburban life would be torn apart, and the community of Katy would soon learn that this was no ordinary tragedy. What initially appeared to be a senseless act of violence was, in fact, far more complicated and sinister than anyone could have imagined. As the news of Belinda Temple's murder spread through the close-knit community of Katy, Texas, the police response was swift. Crime scene investigators quickly swarmed the Temple household, discovering a scene of horror. Belinda's lifeless body in a bedroom, the violent nature of her death apparent. What stood out immediately, however, was the absence of typical signs of forced entry. The house wasn't ransacked, and while there was broken glass on the floor, it didn't suggest a burglary gone wrong. From the outset, investigators were suspicious. The lack of missing valuables, combined with the broken glass, suggested the crime was personal, potentially committed by someone with access to the house. As forensic investigators combed through the scene, they began to question David Temple's account of a burglary. His story didn't align with the evidence, and inconsistencies in his statements began to grow. The medical examiner's report confirmed Belinda had been shot and killed by blunt trauma. Tragically, her unborn daughter, eagerly awaited by the couple, also died. The brutality of the murder, coupled with David being the last person to have seen Belinda alive, shifted the investigation's focus toward him. David's behavior during his initial police interview raised further suspicions. Though distraught, his responses were unsettling, with contradictions in his story. He claimed to have left the house with their son, Evan, at 4 p.m., but security footage from Home Depot placed him there around 4:30 p.m. His timeline was falling apart. As detectives probed deeper into his story, the inconsistencies grew. His claim of a burglar entering the home and killing Belinda was beginning to seem less likely. The lack of an alibi added to the growing suspicion that David was involved in his wife's death. The breakthrough came when forensic experts revealed that the gun used to kill Belinda was registered to David. This crucial detail directly tied him to the weapon, shifting the investigation's focus entirely onto him. But even with this new evidence, there were still unanswered questions. What had driven David to kill his wife? And was Belinda the only victim? Or was there more to this tragedy than anyone had imagined? David's initial interview marked a pivotal moment in the investigation. As authorities continued to dig into his life, they were about to uncover even darker secrets that would shake both the Temple family and the Katy community. As the investigation into Belinda Temple's murder progressed, new revelations cast a darker shadow over David Temple's life. While police initially focused on David as the prime suspect, they explored every possible angle, including Riley Sanders, a former student at A.L.E.F. Hastings High School, where David coached. Riley and David had a tense relationship following a heated dispute over a football game, resulting in Riley's suspension from the team. Investigators learned that Riley had access to the murder weapon, David's gun, and explored whether he might have sought revenge. However, Riley's alibi proved solid, with multiple witnesses confirming he was out of town on the day of the murder. The investigation then returned to David, uncovering troubling details about his personal life. Detectives discovered he had been carrying on an affair with Heather Scott, a colleague from A.L.E.F. Hastings High School, hidden from Belinda for months. When interviewed by police, Heather's testimony revealed crucial insights into David's fractured marriage. She described how David had grown emotionally distant from Belinda, often confiding his marital dissatisfaction to her. According to Heather, while David spoke about wanting to leave Belinda, he never made concrete plans to do so. These revelations about David's unhappiness raised troubling questions and suggested a potential motive for murder. David's behavior throughout the investigation only intensified suspicion. He became combative when questioned about Heather, growing visibly irritated and defensive. His refusal to discuss the affair seemed like another attempt to shield his darker reality from public view. As investigators constructed the timeline of events on the day of Belinda's murder, key inconsistencies in David's story emerged. He claimed he left the house with their son, Evan, to run an errand, but security footage from Home Depot contradicted his account. The footage showed David entering the store at 4:30 p.m., a full half hour after he claimed to have left the house. This discrepancy raised more questions than answers. The discovery of David's affair, combined with evidence of his strained marriage, became pivotal in understanding the possible motive behind Belinda's death. His emotional withdrawal, dissatisfaction, and growing resentment became clearer with each passing day. As investigators pieced together these personal details, a clearer picture emerged. David had become trapped in a marriage he no longer wanted. His affair had become his emotional escape. And when his double life became too difficult to maintain, the unthinkable happened. Despite the mounting evidence, the investigation continued to pursue answers to countless questions, with David's behavior remaining a central focus. One thing became increasingly clear. David Temple was not the distraught, innocent husband he had initially portrayed. The investigation was unraveling the web of lies that had defined his life, bringing the chilling reality of Belinda's murder into sharper focus. As the months dragged on, the murder of Belinda Temple began to fade into the shadows of forgotten cases. Despite mounting evidence against David Temple, the investigation faltered. Frustration grew among the officers working the case and within the Katy community, who had hoped for justice. Meanwhile, David's life moved forward without interruption. He moved in with his mistress, Heather Scott, and things started to return to a semblance of normalcy. The case, once the talk of the town, seemed to stall, its resolution slipping further away. In the legal world, the absence of irrefutable evidence kept investigators in a frustrating state of limbo. Although circumstantial evidence pointed heavily toward David, it wasn't enough to build a solid case. The broken glass, the gun registered to David, the affair, these pieces painted a damning picture, but no physical evidence linked David directly to the crime scene. The lack of DNA or forensic evidence placed a heavy burden on the case, leaving it unresolved. In 2000, the grand jury's decision dealt a devastating blow. They ruled not to indict David Temple on charges of murder, citing insufficient evidence. This decision left Belinda's family, the police, and the community reeling, grappling with the harsh reality that suspicion alone might not be enough to hold David accountable. What once seemed like a promising case now faded into an unsolvable mystery. Meanwhile, David's life continued with disturbing ease. He married Heather Scott in 2000, and together they built a new life, seemingly free from the past. While Belinda's murder should have cast a long shadow, David moved forward with no apparent remorse. His new marriage and growing family seemed to offer him a sense of normalcy, unsettling the community, which had expected at least some trace of guilt. To many, it felt as if Belinda's tragic death had become a distant chapter, erased by time and his new life. But Belinda's family refused to let the case slip into obscurity. Her parents, crushed by grief, but determined to see justice done, launched a public campaign to reopen the case. A billboard went up in Katy, featuring Belinda's face and a plea for information about her death. It stood as a stark reminder that her family would not rest until they had answers. The billboard drew attention, but it was the relentless persistence of Belinda's family, especially her mother, that kept the case alive in the public eye. They attended every hearing, met with district attorneys, and rallied for the case to be re-examined. Despite their tireless efforts, the case remained cold, and the pain of losing Belinda lingered unaddressed. The community seemed resigned to the idea that the truth might never be revealed. Yet sometimes in the darkest corners of a cold case, a single new lead can spark hope. Belinda's case remained open, and in 2014, a new development emerged that would bring it back into the spotlight, breathing new life into the investigation. 15 years after Belinda Temple's tragic murder, the case was reignited in 2014. A new team of prosecutors and investigators, armed with fresh eyes, began to revisit the case, fueled by advances in forensic technology and a changing approach to circumstantial evidence. This provided an opportunity to reconsider long-standing questions that had haunted the Katy community for over a decade. A key factor in the revival was the comparison to another high-profile case, the Scott Peterson case. Much like Belinda, Lacey Peterson had been a pregnant woman whose husband became the primary suspect in her death. The similarities were chilling: a seemingly perfect marriage shattered by betrayal, a hidden affair, and a husband who seemed emotionally detached after his wife's murder. The conviction of Scott Peterson, largely based on circumstantial evidence, provided a blueprint for handling cases like Belinda's, where hard evidence was scarce, but suspicion ran deep. Inspired by Peterson's case, prosecutors began reconstructing the timeline of January 11, 1999. Every inconsistency in David Temple's alibi was revisited. His statements, riddled with contradictions, were scrutinized again. Evidence previously dismissed or overlooked was examined under a new light, from his stop at Home Depot to the strange timing of his return home. This renewed investigation wasn't just about reconstructing a timeline. It was also about uncovering motive. Prosecutors argued that David's affair with Heather Scott wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a possible catalyst for murder. David had become increasingly unhappy in his marriage, and the affair gave him an escape from a life he felt trapped in. With the birth of his daughter, soon to bind him more to Belinda, the prosecution believed David saw her as an obstacle to his future with Heather. Eliminating her might have seemed like the only way forward. As the case was pieced together, more witnesses came forward. Many previously silent or dismissed. Friends of Belinda spoke about her struggles in the marriage, her increasing isolation, and fears of David's controlling behavior. These testimonies, along with new forensic analysis and a clearer motive, made for a strong case. In 2015, after years of uncertainty, David Temple was arrested and charged with Belinda's murder. The news shocked the Katy community, reopening painful memories of her death. For Belinda's family, it was a bittersweet moment, a long-awaited step toward justice, but also a painful reminder of their years of loss. The revival of the case marked the beginning of a lengthy legal battle. David's defense team prepared to challenge the evidence, while the prosecution prepared to expose the darkest truths behind what had once seemed like a perfect life. The fight for justice, long delayed, was far from over. The renewed investigation into Belinda Temple's murder led to a dramatic trial in 2007, 8 years after David Temple's initial arrest. The prosecution built a meticulous case, arguing that Temple had planned his wife's murder to escape a marriage he resented. While his affair with Heather Scott was significant, prosecutors portrayed it as just one element of a deeper motive: Temple's desire for a new life without Belinda. Key evidence included the affair, broken glass from Belinda's home, and suspicious timing around the murder. The prosecution contended that Temple had staged the scene to appear like a failed robbery, presenting him as someone driven by selfish desires and capable of extreme actions. The defense team focused on the circumstantial nature of the case, arguing there was no direct evidence linking Temple to the crime. They portrayed him as a devoted husband and father, suggesting police had overlooked other potential suspects. Throughout the proceedings, Temple remained stoic, while Belinda's grieving family attended each day, hoping for justice. After weeks of testimony, the jury found Temple guilty of capital murder, sentencing him to life without parole. For Belinda's family, it was a bittersweet victory. While they had long awaited this outcome, nothing could undo their loss or the damage Temple had caused. However, in 2016, Temple's legal team successfully appealed the conviction. They argued that crucial evidence had been withheld and constitutional violations had occurred. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals agreed, overturning the conviction due to legal errors in jury instructions and evidence disclosure. This reversal devastated Belinda's family, who had believed justice was finally served. The case returned to court in 2019 for a second trial. The prosecution came prepared to address previous mistakes, presenting the previously omitted evidence in full. Despite the defense's continued claims of Temple's innocence, the evidence seemed overwhelming. The second trial faced multiple delays due to the COVID-19 pandemic, further testing Belinda's family's endurance. Yet their determination never wavered. They remained committed to seeing their daughter's killer brought to justice, regardless of how long it took. This prolonged legal battle exemplified both a family's unwavering pursuit of justice and the complex, often painful path the legal system takes toward establishing truth and accountability. In 2023, David Temple's case finally reached its conclusion after nearly 25 years of legal battles. The prolonged fight for justice had exhausted both the Temple family and the Katy community, particularly weighing on Belinda's family, who had tirelessly sought the truth. After years of trials, appeals, and setbacks, the moment of resolution arrived. The final court proceedings were intense. David Temple, who had spent decades attempting to clear his name, faced mounting evidence against him. The prosecution had meticulously reconstructed their case over the years, presenting a clear timeline, motive, and evidence. When the jury returned with a guilty verdict for capital murder, it brought both relief and painful finality to Belinda's family. Temple was sentenced to life in prison without parole. While this verdict provided closure, it couldn't erase the years of pain and loss Belinda's family had endured. No legal outcome could bring back Belinda or the unborn child she carried. The victory felt bittersweet. Justice had come too late to heal their deepest wounds. Belinda's mother, in particular, had experienced moments of doubt throughout their long struggle, wondering if the truth would ever emerge. Yet they persevered, finding some solace in knowing Temple would spend his remaining years behind bars. For David Temple, once a promising high school football star, life had taken a dramatic turn. His marriage to Heather Scott, which he had hoped would provide an escape from his past, crumbled under renewed investigation. His future now consisted of life behind bars, far from the freedom he had envisioned. The case became a sobering reminder of the hidden struggles beneath seemingly perfect lives in the tight-knit community of Katy, Texas. Behind the facade of a happy marriage lay deep fractures in the Temple household, infidelity, control, and emotional detachment that ultimately led to violence. The prosecution portrayed Temple as a man driven by selfishness and calculated cruelty, indifferent to the lives of his wife and unborn child. For the justice system, the case highlighted the challenges of working with circumstantial evidence and the importance of thorough investigation. It demonstrated how difficult it can be for families to find closure when legal proceedings stretch over decades. Despite the emotional toll, Belinda's family remained resolute in their pursuit of justice. Their fight wasn't just about securing a conviction, it was about preserving Belinda's legacy and ensuring that she and her unborn child wouldn't be forgotten. Through grief and frustration, they demonstrated the enduring power of love and the importance of perseverance in pursuing truth. The impact of Belinda's murder extended beyond her immediate family. The Katy community emerged from this tragedy with a heightened awareness of domestic violence. Her death became a catalyst for change, encouraging people to look beyond appearances and recognize subtle signs of turmoil. It emphasized the importance of early intervention in potentially dangerous situations. Belinda Temple's story ultimately represents both profound loss and remarkable resilience. Her family's unwavering determination ensured that her voice would be heard, even in death. The final conviction of David Temple proved that justice, though delayed, could still be achieved. Her legacy serves as a reminder to never judge solely by appearances and to remain vigilant in recognizing and addressing the silent dangers of domestic violence. Only through such awareness can similar tragedies be prevented. This case demonstrated the importance of persistence in law enforcement and the legal system. While the path to justice was long and filled with obstacles, truth ultimately prevailed. For Belinda's family, the resolution, though long awaited, brought some measure of closure, even if the scars would never fully heal. Their fight for justice served not only Belinda's memory, but also reinforced the principle that truth can triumph, regardless of how long it takes.